Chapter 2. My love affair with cannabis began in a way typical to many young people. I was introduced to smoking dope in my second year of high school, 1981, when I was 14. I remember that first time I tried it. I was with an older school friend of mine and a mate of hers who had left school. We were hanging out at my friend's house while her parents were away for the day. The older girl, whom I hadn't met before, brought out a wooden pipe. My friend produced a bag of dope and proceeded to stuff the bowl full. Incense burning, the obligatory Pink Floyd album was put on the stereo. The pipe was lit and the scene was set for my first lesson in the Beginner's Guide to Smoking Pot. The pair were diligent in their tuition. I coughed a lot at first, as newbies do, and I can't be sure if the buzz I got was from the cannabis or merely from a lack of oxygen to the brain from all that spluttering. Still, we continued until we felt that I had it mastered. We sat around taking turns on the pipe, the specially selected trippy music played on in the background, and we mooched around for the rest of the afternoon in a manner that was to become oh so familiar in the years ahead. I had heard that often the first time a person smokes dope nothing much happens. I recall feeling a little odd, although it's hard to know how big a part the power of suggestion played in that. Whatever, it was enough to make me keen to try it again. In fact, I couldn't wait. I began to spend ever more time with kids who were much older than me, and they seemed to have an unlimited supply of cannabis and alcohol. My friends in my own age group started to seem dull and immature by comparison. I liked the way the drugs and this new scene made me feel. I revelled in being elevated to the cool crowd, coming as I did from the distinctly uncool position of being the mayor's daughter in small-town New Zealand. I was beguiled with the mythology around drugs, the secrecy, and the association with dead junkie rock stars. I aspired to be like Janis Joplin. She was my role model, in much the same worrying way that Amy Winehouse is for many young people today. And when I won a school prize at age 15, the book I chose to be handed by the principal at the prize-giving ceremony was entitled Bob Marley, Soul Rebel, Natural Mystic. Everyone else had chosen dictionaries, atlases and books about horses. I guess the writing was on the wall. I was smart enough to do well at school, but not smart enough to make rational decisions about the use of drugs, alcohol and cigarettes. And by the end of my fourth form year, I was doing them all on a regular basis, and I was party central. To say that I had trouble with authority was an understatement. At home and at school, any rule or decision imposed upon me that interfered with my substance intake would be met by my howls of cruelty and unfairness. I was a teenage Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a two-headed beast on the inside as well as the out. It was not an easy time in our household. My high school years continued thus. I spent a lot of time in detention, mainly for my attitude and disruptive influence in the classroom, or for being caught wagging and smoking cigarettes. Both the school and I were relieved to part company a few weeks before my 17th birthday. I moved out of home and up to Wellington. By this time I'd developed a sixth sense about people who smoked dope, and I naturally gravitated towards them. So the supply remained steady, and my attitude and emotional swings settled down since I was no longer under the strictures of my parents and teachers. I worked and played for a couple of years, and at 19 I entered university. I studied hard in my first year, but in my second I moved into a flat where cannabis and alcohol were a natural part of the diet. I was in a steady relationship and things between us were complicated and messy. Feeling unable to cope with the stress of both the relationship and university, I decided to leave my studies and go back into the workforce. Having money in my pocket made things worse. My flatmates and I drank, smoked and partied our way around the 80s Wellington nightlife. Money no particular object. At age 20 I entered another relationship, this time with another regular cannabis user, and my addiction was a fait accompli. My new partner and I lived together for the next 4.5 years. We loved each other very much, or tried to, but we were always stoned, except when we were at work. After the first couple of hedonistic years, things began to unravel. I didn't know it then, but I was beginning to develop symptoms of a depression that would go on to cripple me. I was becoming difficult to communicate with, at least in an adult way. I didn't like engaging in conversations that I perceived would interfere with being high, and I would try and shut down any serious attempt at discussion that my partner chose to initiate. I preferred instead to stare deeply into the television screen and remain in my haze. Newsflash, that's not a relationship. That's a drug addiction. The drugs were starting to come first. My cannabis tin had become the overwhelming object of my desire. The focus of my love had shifted. My partner and I began to argue frequently, always when we'd been smoking dope or drinking, or both. Our arguments went around in circles, unable to be resolved through the fog. It was doing both of our heads in. I had no idea what was happening over this time, either within myself or within the relationship. I assumed that my troubles stemmed from our partnership, that maybe the discord meant I'd simply fallen out of love. After all, when it was just me and the dope, there was no arguing. Therefore, I reasoned, it must be my partner that was the problem. I became increasingly critical and blaming, unable to see through the cloud of smoke that our problems had anything to do with me, or with the drugs. The inevitable ending of this relationship was the catalyst for an intense crisis that would turn my life upside down.